Senator Gallagher.
Thanks, Chair. And I just want to say up front, I think it's really refreshing that Infrastructure Australia has come out in its priority list and said that regional road safety improvements should be a national priority, basically because over a measured period of 10 years, 50% more people get killed in the bush than in the city. And if you live in the bush, you have 4 times more chance of being killed and injured. So I think that that's an astounding statement and should have been there from your predecessors, but that's another issue altogether. So anyway, you've got it on the table. My question is, given that it applies to local governments, state governments, federal governments, institutions like the Transport Accident Commission, which I understand is investing $1 billion in road separation measures in Victoria, how does Regional Infrastructure Australia see this elevation of the problem progressing? Do you just simply point to it and say, look, we should be doing something, or do you coordinate, or do you evaluate? What do you do?
Thank you, Senator. At this stage, we have identified this to be a nationally significant problem. We haven't really looked at some of the options. Again, it's something that is looking for a proponent to take up, to actually own the problem and to actually call to action in terms of identifying options. And clearly, in terms of infrastructure, there are potentially some low-hanging fruit in terms of, in some cases, just better signage, but some of the options will also be more expensive, such as you may need a widening of lanes for a safer curvature. So we would really encourage all levels of government to work together to ensure that a full range of options are actually explored so that we get value for money for taxpayers. And let's not just jump into a predetermined solution. Let's look at the range of solutions that could actually be applied.
Okay, so we all understand the range of solutions that work: separation, metre of separation, shoulder sealing, all of the issues, passing lanes. All of the issues are well identified. What I'm asking you in terms of Infrastructure Australia, you've elevated the issue. What is your role from now on in? I mean, given that some of these treatments like audio tactile lining and the like are not millions of dollars at a time, and they may apply to 20 kilometres of road, how do you pull all this together and make sure TAC, local governments, state governments and the federal funding is united in improving what you've rightly identified as a catastrophic road safety situation in regional Australia?
So you will see in the 2019 infrastructure priority list there is also a regional New South Wales initiative. So that's one where New South Wales government has already identified themselves as a proponent. I think in us identifying that there's a national initiative, it really is going to go back to the state jurisdictions and probably some of the larger councils to work with the state to actually be proponents. And through that process, they will then submit, for example, options assessment reports to us, and then ultimately submit a business case for our evaluation for the expenditure that they propose to address these problems.
Well, perhaps it's a question for Mr Kennedy. So given that Infrastructure Australia has highlighted, it's actually just pinned the tail on the donkey, it's just actually highlighted a very obvious situation which has been around since 2006, identified 6 to 16, 4 times more likely to get killed or injured in regional Australia. We know what works. What is the department doing in terms of prioritising this? Or you just don't do anything about it?
No, we do things about it.
Please tell me.
Well, the department's role in road safety will be explored under surface transport. I'm happy to outline
Okay, well, what about
issues.
infrastructure? I mean, this is a pretty obvious question. Do you have a strategy for this? I mean, I have a situation in the Eyre Peninsula where 800,000 tonnes of grain may come off a rail system that hasn't been maintained and go on to poorly maintained council roads with an increase of 30,000 truck movements per annum. And most of those will end up going through the town of Port Lincoln. Pretty pressing stuff. Local councils can't afford it. State government doesn't seem to be on it. And where's the federal government?
So the federal government has been discussing these issues with the state jurisdictions. They were discussed recently at the Transport Infrastructure Council meeting in November last year. And in part, that was also, we saw presentations from John Crozier and Jeremy, surname escapes me.
Jeremy Woolley.
Jeremy
Yeah,
Woolley.
we're very familiar with those two eminent gentlemen.
And I think I'm not sure if we spoke. Did we speak about it in last estimate, Senator? Anyway, so there's a number of recommendations in that report which we're responding to, and you would have also noticed that the BITRA recently released an excellent map that shows those parts of the country where road deaths have been zero and those parts where it...
We keep mapping it. What are we doing about it? That's my question. I'll give up, Chair. It's early in the day.
Well, now, hold on. I don't think Mr Kennedy had finished what he was saying to you. He was leading into something.
So part of the reason why the evidence is important in this case is where things are working well, we want to replicate that across the country, Senator. So all of these things are being brought together.
But can I come in there? Sorry, Dr Kennedy, sorry. And we will go through this extensively when we get to surface transport. But Senator Gallagher's question through you, Chair, was very clearly, in terms of IA, what are you doing? What is the department doing? So if you don't have the strategy and you agree with IA, let's just move on.
It's the government strategy. We can talk in more detail about the government's response to the road safety issues being raised by a number of parties. We got the IA's assessment late last week, and that will feed into that broader assessment. There's no doubt, I agree with you, Senator, that the road safety issues in regional Australia are significant, and that is the focus of where ministers of all jurisdictions, ministers' minds are in trying to address this issue.